I am going to start accepting, letting them in.
Mhm. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you all can make it. So we're going to give people maybe a couple more minutes to enter, or at least a minute to enter the room, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So in the meantime, I am Dr. Natasha Hill. I'm one of the educational advisors here in the OITE, and I'm joined today by Moraima. Moraima, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Matus Nicodemos Moraima. I work in OITE as an educational advisor. Very nice to meet you all.
And so today we're going to talk about about the medical school personal statements. We do have two other educational advisors in the OITE, Dr. John Taborn, who unfortunately was not able to make it today, and the director of the educational program, Dr. Brittany Hardy, who should be joining us shortly. And so we're going to go ahead and get started with our talk for today. We have a lot to cover. So this is our presentation outline for today. We're going to go through, what the personal statement is, what medical schools are looking for, give kind of a brief overview before we touch on some of the specifics about motivation, collecting experiences, selecting the content, and then going through some of what's different about the DO or osteopathic personal statement, and then kind of give you a rough presentation or picture of what that document should really look like when we're thinking about what type of essay we're writing. And then we're going to touch on the why MD PhD and significant research experiences essays that are for MD PhD applicants. And then tell you a little bit about our online personal statement course. Hopefully you'll all be able to register for it. And then we're going to give you the perspective of some admissions officers. So as we get started, let's think about how many of you are applying this cycle and to how many schools are you going to apply to? And you can put that in the Q&A for us to get a sense of what everybody's thinking about this cycle. And Moraima, sorry, you're going to have to shout some of the numbers out for now.
No problem. We have, let me see if I can see the chat.
I believe it should be the Q&A. The chat
Q&A.
should be disabled.
Oh, conversations. I don't know if I'm able to see them, actually.
You should be. You're an organizer.
Hello.
Hello,
I'm calling
Brittany.
from
Hi.
LA. Good to see everybody. Happy Friday.
Hi, Brittany.
Happy
Thanks for
Friday.
showing. Brittany, can you see the Q&A?
I
So
can
people
see
are
the
raising,
Q&A, but I don't see any responses.
so people are
Okay.
raising their hands. So maybe you will have to click on allow. I know that you have
You
to make,
can. You
yes, so
can.
that they can talk, but they can't really, it seems like they can't type right now.
In the Q&A?
It seems like, let me see. Yeah, people, can you give a thumbs up if you cannot write in the chat?
They can't
Yeah,
write
that's
in the
what's going
chat,
on
but they should be able to write in the Q&A.
in the Q&A. Are you guys able to write in the Q&A? Can you do, let's do a sad face if you can't write in the Q&A.
Yeah,
It
so
seems like
they
they can.
can't. So,
Yeah.
Brittany, do you know how to fix that?
Let me
I'll
And
work
then
on it. I'm working. I'll try to work on it. Let me see.
okay. So we'll try and get that fixed so everybody can start asking questions. And then we'll skip our next question for now, since we don't have the chat available for you. If need be, let me know, Brittany, and I can stop real quick and do it real quick. Okay, so As we start thinking about, our personal statements, please keep in mind that the personal statement is a very important part of your medical school application. And I know you all know that there are multiple parts. And so when you think about the personal statement, a good personal statement won't get you into medical school if you don't have a competitive application. But a bad personal statement can ruin a very competitive application. So please keep that in mind as you are working on your personal statements. And so to help you write, a competitive personal statement, you first want to know what the prompt is for the medical school application. So looking at the AACOMAS instruction manual, we see here that the personal comments essay is an opportunity for you to distinguish yourself from other applicants. And so some of the questions that you can consider addressing are the why have you selected the field of medicine? And we've taken this a step further to look at what have you done to explore this path? And then next, you can think about what motivates you to learn about the medical field and medicine. And then what else do you want to tell the medical schools, or what do you want them to know about you that you haven't disclosed in any other part of the application? And so basically, we've translated this down into why do you want to be a physician? And you have you have a total of 5,300 characters to present why you want to be a physician. And so this doesn't yield a lot of leeway to really deviate from this prompt. And so we want to be direct and focused and make sure that we're addressing this prompt. In addition to the main instructions, the double AMC also gives you the option saying that you may include information such as, like hardships or challenges or obstacles, or any commentary on significant fluctuations in your academic record in your personal statement if you are unable to do it anywhere else in your application. Okay, so for those of you applying for AACOMAS or for DO programs, the AACOMAS personal statement is a way to introduce yourself to the admissions committee, letting them know who you are as a person and as a candidate. And, the question that they're really looking for is why you want to be a doctor. But specifically, they want to know why you want to be an osteopathic physician, right? And so now that we know what our prompts are for the personal statement, let's think about what the goals are for this document. So the goal of the personal statement is for you to explain your motivation for medicine. Why do you want to be a doctor? And how did this motivation develop? You can also highlight, or you're also going to want to highlight, sorry, you're also going to want to highlight your readiness for medical training and convey that you understand medicine's challenges and that you've taken steps, through your clinical activities, your research, your service, your leadership to really prepare yourself for medical school. And then you want to show some personal qualities, highlight traits that you developed as you've been involved in these activities, such as resilience, curiosity, teamwork, integrity, empathy. And you want to show these through, your real world examples, the anecdotes that you're going to discuss with your personal statement. Then you're going to demonstrate some reflection, some growth. Show how you've grown, what you've understood about medicine, about patients, about yourself through the experiences that you've been engaged in. And then lastly, you're going to want to differentiate yourself from the other applicants in the pool. Because remember, administrators are going to look through many applications. So a strong essay is going to make you memorable and tell a story that only you can tell. And so think of your personal statement or your personal statement. You can think of it as a story that tells why you want to be a physician, demonstrating, the personal qualities and experiences that have really prepared you for medical school and to be a physician, and leaves your reader with a clear sense of the type of doctor you see yourself aspiring to become. So your audience. So who is your audience? Well, your audience are surprisingly, not surprisingly to any of us, physicians, right? Because who's best to see if you're prepared to train to be a physician than a physician? And for some of you, especially those that are applying, MD, PhD, you're also going to have scientists. that are going to be reviewing your applications, right? And then in some cases, you'll have medical students. Again, for those applying MD, PhD, you may even have some grad students and some administrators, right? And these individual groups may or may not be specialist readers in your area of expertise. So when you're writing your essays, make sure you're making them easy for anyone to understand. And so avoiding a lot of that over technical details or jargon that's associated with your area of expertise. And then also remember that these administrators or these individuals that'll be reviewing your application read hundreds, if not thousands, of personal statements each cycle. And so they're going to have a limited time to be able to dedicate to your personal statement. So we're going to work on, or you're going to work on making sure that your personal statement has a clear structure to help your story stand out amongst the group of personal statements. And they also want to see evidence that you're committed to medicine, that you're motivated, your maturity, your resilience, right? And so they're looking for authenticity in your statement, and they want to be convinced that you're ready and that you're applying for the right reasons and that you understand what you're getting into when it comes to becoming a physician.
Natasha, can I just interject really quickly? The
Yeah.
Q&A should be working. Can someone like do it? One of the attendees, can you do a test to see if it's working? Like if someone just ask a question, maybe.
Or just write test.
Yeah, if not, raise your hand if you're still not able to answer it. Use the Q&A. Okay, so it looks like people still are not able to use the Q&A. Okay, thanks for letting me know. Well, we're working on it.
Brittany, just open the chat. If you go to the control button, just open the chat.
Okay, I can't open the chat. Okay, that's all right. All right. The
Yeah.
chat should be open for everyone. So hold on, let me chat. Okay, chat should be open. So if you do have a question, you can go ahead and use the chat function to ask the question. Go ahead, Natasha. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And so chat's open, all questions, please put them in the chat. And so back to the audience, right? That's what we were talking about. So your audience, so you can think of, yourself, you're writing and imagining when you're writing that you're speaking to a very busy physician. And this physician may even be a professor at the universities that you're applying to, right? Who wants to quickly grasp why you want to be a physician, why medicine, right? Who are you as a person, and what makes you different from the next applicant in the pool? And so now that we have a sense of the goal of this essay, as well as the audience that we're going to be writing to, let's take a little glance at the structure of this essay. And so really, we're looking at three main sections of the essay, right? Your initial motivation, what made you interested, what captured you about medicine that made you want to gravitate to being a physician, right? And think about avoiding, cliches and hooks. And we'll get more into detail on that in subsequent slides. And then the middle or the meat part of your essay, the two or three body paragraphs that you choose to write, are really going to discuss those formative experiences, some of the direct patient care that you've done, some of the volunteering that you've done, right? And you're really going to take these experiences and reflect on what you learned about medicine and about yourself. And then lastly, you're going to have a conclusion that really connects the experiences and skills that you value and that brought you to medicine. And, your vision, where do you see yourself as a physician? So, getting started writing your personal statement. It's always hard to get started writing something. So, I'm going to suggest that when you get started writing your personal statement, start with something easy. And start with collecting your experiences. You guys have done a number of activities to prepare yourself for medical school, right? So take a little bit of time to really gather those past activities, thinking about what you learned about the medical profession, about testing your interests, and you're even going to have activities that show specific cases where, you saw the impact that the doctor had on a patient's health and, the role of a doctor and, that successful, implications of, that problem solving skills that led to, a treatment or improvement of a patient's health, right? And so you're going to have all of those types of stories that I think you should compile onto like a spreadsheet, a Word document, maybe a notebook, however you like to do it. If you like to type on a computer or put pen to paper, but take all of those experiences down, categorize them how you will. Do you want to do it as like sections of clinical volunteering, then volunteering in leadership? Do you want to list the experiences alphabetical order or in chronological order? Whichever way suits you best. Just compile them on some kind of document, giving yourself, 1 or 2 sentences where you're writing down a little bit about what you did, what you learned from the experience, and maybe an anecdote that you may want to share in your personal statement. And then I want you to keep working on these documents because you guys are all still involved in a number of activities that are continuing to prepare you for medical school. And so you still want to, keep adding to those experiences and noting down what you're learning in the activities that you're involved in now. And, writing down those anecdotes and those professional learning about being a physician. Right? And so that's really going to be your first step is thinking about compiling all of your experiences because you're going to come back to this sheet and start selecting the experiences you're going to want to put in your personal statement, right? And so the selection process is really going to start with, doing your pre-writing, outlining what you really want to talk about, what's going to be your story in your personal statement. And there's a number of pre-writing techniques, and I have them listed here. You can figure out which one works best for you and use that as you start to plan what experiences and what you're going to want to put in your personal statement. Okay, so here I have an example of a pre-writing technique. This is an outline, and we've kind of put it together in a way that says what my prompt is, why I want to be a physician, and noting, some of the ways that, I became interested, or maybe somebody became interested in wanting to be a physician, like a gradually becoming interested in medicine through science, maybe some of the experiences that they want to talk about as they approach their the meat section or their journey of their essay, and then conclusions, some of the things that a person may want to highlight when thinking about what type of physician they see themselves becoming. And so since the essay starts off with your motivation, let's really delve into, what motivations people may consider discussing as a part of their initial motivation that they tested through their journey. So, why you want to become a doctor, that initial motivation. For some of you, that's going to be an epiphany moment. You were doing something, something happened, and then just all of a sudden it struck you like a bolt of lightning, and that light bulb came on, and it was like, I want to be a doctor, right? And that's perfectly fine. Mention it briefly, and then get to the point where you're testing your motivation. For others of you, your why you want to become a doctor hinges around, health, sickness. Maybe a relative was sick, maybe you yourself were sick. Again, a very valid reason to want to be a doctor, but be brief in your description. Focus on, what you've seen the doctors do and the impact of the physician. Keep it positive. And remember, this is going to be something that sparks your interest in exploring the field of medicine, and then move on to that exploration. For others of you, your why you want to become a doctor may be something that you've seen or observed or experienced in your community, a community that you visited, a community that you worked in, that has really motivated you to want to explore, being a physician so that you can help a community, right? And so if that's the case, again, perfectly relevant, mention it briefly and then move on to how you tested your interests. For others of you, this was a gradual process. Maybe you were a very scientifically curious person or interested in science, or maybe just curious in general, have a passion for learning, compassionate about people, or empathetic, or you're an empathetic person. So maybe being a physician is for you. Then what? Well, if maybe being a physician is for you and you've had one of these motivations or any motivation that prompted your interest, keep it brief, about 4 sentences, and then move on to your test. And your test is the then part of this. And so we're going to move on to, what we're going to call the essential part of your test. And that's really testing that clinical exposure, testing through shadowing, through clinical volunteering, through other clinical experiences like EMT or scribing, testing that interest in wanting to be a physician and care for patients. So let's start off with exploring that shadowing experience. Okay, so when we think about starting off with the physician, we're thinking about that unique role of a physician and how they've had an impact on health and lives, that problem-solving aspect of medicine. And so when you think about crafting this part of, that essential paragraph, you're going to think about, what did you observe the doctors do? What did you learn about the profession that, excited you? And then you're going to think about, well, do I remember any cases where the unique role of a physician was really exemplified, right? And when I'm thinking about, this example of a unique role that I saw or that you've seen from a physician, also think about including, when you're describing it in your paragraphs, think about including the problem-solving aspect of medicine. And you can complement this problem-solving aspect of medicine, but please don't overuse the other important, but maybe not as unique as, the problem-solving aspects that physicians do. But physicians are also compassionate and empathetic, and these have a valid place in the medical field. And especially when you think about what the final goal of being a physician is, right? Because physicians use that kindness, that empathy to develop trust with their patients so that they can gather information to help them develop a diagnosis and treatment plan to ultimately improve that patient's health, right? And so these are kind of the things, this is kind of the story you're going to think about telling, leading to that unique role of a physician. And then also, when you're writing this portion of your essay, think about, did you identify any challenges that doctors face? Are you willing to deal with those challenges, right? And are you willing to face them? And remember, when you're writing about what you've learned or what you've seen physicians do, make sure you specify what you've learned and how you've grown, how this learning from watching physicians do their job has really impacted you and motivated you to continue exploring this field of medicine. And that exploration can also include this clinical volunteering or even a clinical job, right? And so include an experience where you've had direct patient care, where you were the one providing that care to a patient. Think about those skills that you developed in this space, right? What did you learn? What did you learn about the environment of the facility, the clinic, the hospital that you were in? The different team members, how they interact with each other, um, the patient population that you were working with, and the setting that you were providing care. What did you learn about all of these? How did that impact you, right? A big part of writing your personal statement is really your reflections, right? And so yes, you're going to talk about what you did while you did the volunteering, but you also want to balance what you did with a lot of what you learned, your reflections, how you've grown from these experiences, and how they really prepared you for your next step. And this brings me to a very important phrase that the previous director of the pre-med program used to say routinely, which is emphasis through proportion. And so you can think about this as emphasizing those most important aspects that you've learned and that you gain and that you've been involved in through your experience by the proportion of space you give them in that essay, right? And so emphasis through proportion, those really important parts, you're going to give them a bit more space so that you can really emphasize, right? And so think about that as you move through the clinical portion, because the clinical portion is really going to be essential for your essay, right? And so think about the proportion of space you're going to be giving this section of your essay. But now that you've thought about your clinical section, you're going to move on to some of the other experiences that you've been involved in that you're going to want to talk about and, show the committee that you've been involved in and what you've learned. And you're going to select some of these experiences by what's important to you and how they relate to the medical field, right? Their importance for your preparation for your medical school journey, the importance of what you've learned and learned about the medical profession and what you've learned about yourself in regards to the medical profession. And so keep in mind when you're thinking about these different experiences that you've been involved in, you may consider grouping some of the experiences or some of the things that you learned that were similar, like the skills, the information, and think of them more as topics instead of just singular experiences, right? And so we've already talked about motivation and we've already talked about the clinical aspect that you should discuss in your essay. Now let's think about the rest of the meat section, so the rest of the body part of the paragraph. And maybe you may think about, deciding to write about your research and what kind of research you were in and what kind of applications, how is it going to move medicine forward, right? Or maybe you recognize the role of a physician in leadership and want to talk about your experiences in leadership and how they prepared you to be a leader in the medical field. Or maybe you recognize the physician's role in service for the community. And maybe you want to talk about how you service the community and what you learned through these activities and how you care for people and work with individuals in certain communities. And so let's start off with that, community or clinical or, non-clinical volunteering. And so when you're selecting these type of experiences and thinking about writing them in your personal statement, select experiences that, genuinely influenced you to pursue medicine and show some personal growth. And so this may be community service, like public outreach. You may consider wanting to think about some of those long-term commitments where you've shown sustained engagement. And don't think of this as I need to tell how many hours I've completed. Really, the best stories are going to show what you've learned, that empathy, that teamwork, that service, right? Focus on the human element in this paragraph or in these paragraphs where you're discussing these experiences, right? Because the admissions want to see and learn more about your reflections as opposed to the task that you were doing. The task gives them context. Your reflections show them how you've learned, how you've grown, and how you've prepared to take on these next steps. So others of you may consider writing about leadership as an experience, right? And so you're going to pick maybe a couple of experiences where your leadership had a clear outcome or taught you something about, teamwork, responsibility, organizing and a big broad event, right? And here I have a couple of examples to kind of just illustrate some leadership experiences. But as you're writing about this, make sure you stay focused on that leadership aspect. So focus and meaningful responses. And so you may want to use the STAR method to actually do this. So, briefly set the scene. What were you doing? What was your role? What was the challenge? What did you do as a leader or to guide others? And think about what you've learned about leadership and how it relates to medicine, right? And so again, this reflection piece is going to be very important. And as you're reflecting about what you've learned and what you've gained, also think about reflecting on some of the pre-med competencies for entering medical students, right? And these competencies are going to fall into three categories. You have your professional competencies, you have your science competencies, and you have your thinking and reasoning competencies. And so again, you want to reflect on your past experiences and consider including some of them that have held, or some of the competencies that you have learned through some of the experiences that you've been involved in. And remember, one experience can really illustrate proficiency across multiple competencies in multiple categories. And so let's look a little bit closer at what these competencies are. So under the professional competencies section, we have, excuse me, commitment to learning and growing, cultural awareness, empathy and compassion, oral communication, resilience and adaptability, service orientation, teamwork and collaboration. And a lot of these competencies you're developing and you're growing and you're improving through a lot of the activities that you've been involved in, such as, your volunteering, your leadership, your research. All this good stuff has prepared you for, discussing how you've learned and grown in these areas. And so think about incorporating them into your personal statement. And so the science competencies, living systems, human behaviors. You've also been engaged with this, right? Learning people's behaviors. You've done this working in the community with people, or working in the clinic or the hospital with patients, right? Living systems. You've learned about this in your individual labs, right? And so think about how you can incorporate these two competencies in your essay, as well as the thinking and reasoning. I mean, critical thinking, quantitative reasoning, scientific inquiry, written communication. You guys do these all the time in your research labs, right? And in many other aspects of the preparation that you've done to prepare yourself for medical school. Also think about incorporating these in your reflections about your experiences that have really prepared you for medical school. And since, research is one of those experiences that has really prepared you for medical school, and you're here at NIH, why not write about your NIH research, right? A lot of your peers aren't going to have, the experience where they've done full-time research at the NIH. So why not have that as something that you potentially are interested in writing about? And the angle that you're going to take when you think about writing about your research for your medical school application or medical school personal statement is how medicine advances through research, right? And when you think about describing your research experience, you're going to think about starting off with that big picture, what is the research focus of the lab and what's your big question, right? And then you're going to go into a broad description, give us a rationale. Why is it important to study this, right? What were your high level, results and their implications? And when you think about implications, think of them as like application, what is your research really intending to do? Is it, intending to develop some prevention mechanisms, help with diagnosis of a disease, or maybe treatment or prognosis, right? And remember, regardless of if you're applying MD or MD PhD, you can all write about your research in your personal statement if that's the story that you want to tell. Okay. So your theme or your themes, right? Why do you want to be a doctor? What have you learned about the medical profession, and how have you tested your interests, right? How have you prepared for medical school and the medical profession? And so these are all aspects that you're going to touch on throughout your personal statement, right? And so this is like the overarching theme and how you're going to go through it. But remember that your personal experiences are what is going to give your personal statement its uniqueness. It's your story, it's your anecdotes, right? It's what you've learned, your examples. That's where the uniqueness comes from. Okay? So that's the personal statement. So let's think about, what's different for those of you who are going to be applying osteopathic medicine. And this is where you're going to think about that holistic approach, that manipulative medicine, shadowing, and what you've learned from DO's physicians, right? And so when you think about your ULTA, you're understanding the goal of your personal statement. In addition to what we've already discussed, you should also draw on why you're specifically interested in osteopathic medicine. Could it be its philosophy, its approach, its patient care model? What is it that really resonates with you about this type of field of medicine? And then you're also going to want to show your understanding of the osteopathic principles, emphasizing that holistic or patient-centered care, mentioning your exposure, the things that you learned from shadowing a DO physician, like the manipulative medicine process, right? And then you're going to want to really reflect on that experience, considering those DO philosophies of, that mind-body connection, right? So that reflection, that whole person healing, and speak to how that really resonates with you and the type of physician you see yourself becoming, right? And focus on your personal growth and insight from the DO's perspective. So a step further, when we're thinking about this and you're explaining your why DO, explain it clearly, obviously, but don't assume that holistic or mentioning holistic is going to be enough, right? Really articulate why being an osteopathic physician or osteopathic medicine really fits and resonates with you. Tell your story and reflect on it authentically, and avoid some of, the common pitfalls, right? And I guess one of the ones that I really want to highlight is really copying and pasting the MD personal statement that you've written for MCAS and putting it in a comus without making any adaptations for the osteopathic philosophy. Okay, so really make sure you mention that in your essay. And so with that, I'm going to take a minute to pause and see if there's any common questions that we should address.
Hey, Natasha. So I got most of the questions, but the one that just came in that if you could address, someone asks, what should the actual like tone be of your personal statement? Should it be more like you're describing memorable events and experiences, more like a journal style, or is it more like giving a review of giving like a review of your experience? So more like report style versus more like a journal style. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, thank you. Great question. So really, your personal statement is actually a formal argumentative essay, really. And so really what you're going to be doing is kind of, and we're actually going to get to this in the next couple slides, so I will reiterate this. But like I was saying, it's a formal argument or persuasive argumentative essay, right? And so you're going to state, basically what the experience is, how so you're going to use great transitions, right? Come off your motivation and think about, that clinical experience. And so your first step to, maybe exploring the clinical field was, shadowing a physician, right? And you shadowed a certain physician at a certain clinic. So physician X at clinic OITE, right? And then you're going to take them through, that anecdote, that memorable event that happened. So through this experience, you got to explore and you've learned, that unique process or path of medicine through a certain anecdote, right? And then you're going to reflect on the anecdote. What did you learn about medicine? How has that prepared you to continue to explore this field? And how has it prepared you to go to medical school, right? And so it's kind of a combination of, specific facts through examples, as well as your reflection, that personal growth and what you've come from that experience taking with you as you move forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Natasha. I didn't get to introduce myself at the beginning, but I'm Brittany. I'm the director of the Educational Advising Program. It's really good to meet all of you. And I just want to add one quick clarification about for those of you who are applying to MD, PhD programs. So we have talked to some schools and they've made it very clear that the personal statement should really be the why medicine. You can absolutely talk about research in your personal statement if you're applying to an MD, PhD program. You don't have to, but you can, and use what Dr. Hill mentioned as a format to talk about your research experiences in your personal statement, but you don't like absolutely have to. Okay.
No, it's completely up to you what experiences you choose to put into your personal statement. And so if you want to talk about your research, you can. If you don't want to talk about your research, you don't have to. This is your personal statement. It's a reflection of what you want to share with the admissions committee, right? And so for those of you who are applying MD only and you decide you don't want to talk about research, that's perfectly fine. And for those of you who are applying MD, PhD, if you decide you don't want to talk about research in your YMD essay, that's perfectly fine as well, right? And so this is your essay. Tell the admissions committee what you want to know about your preparation and your journey towards medicine. Okay. So thank you for that, Dr. Hardy. So let's think about the paragraph design. And this kind of gets to the question that I was just asked. And so some general thoughts. Yes, this is a formal persuasive essay. There are several styles and approaches to, attacking this essay. Some of you may prefer to write your essay in more of a chronological order, so the events as you pursued them. And some of you may select to do your essay in order of priority, what you feel is the most important to convey. And so this is all going to be dictated by the story you want to tell, right? And so think about which order works best for your story. But keep in mind that these are not your undergrad college admissions essays, nor are they a creative writing essay for your English professor in undergrad. And remember that everything you mention in this essay needs to be relevant and related to, your medical journey, your medical school application, right? And so tell your story, right? your story, your journey, right? Using good transitions from paragraph to paragraph, and make sure you're analyzing. Don't just list what you did, but include the why, right? The why you did it, the what you learned from it, all of that good stuff, because that's also a way for the committee to get to know you, right? Give concrete examples, your anecdotes, give those concrete stories that you've been saving for years on your, I don't know, some people did index cards, some people did journaling as they did, got involved in their experiences. Wherever you have your anecdotes stored, use those concrete details to help show why and how you learn the different things that you're going to mention that you learn. And of course, show credit when appropriate and be succinct. Be direct and succinct in your writing. And make this essay easy for the committee members to read. Because remember, these are very busy individuals and they have limited time to go through your essay. So make it easier on them so they can get through it quickly and see that you have a genuine interest, an authentic interest in being a physician, that you've really prepared yourself, and you know what type of physician you see yourself wanting to be. And I don't mean what type of specialty, but the compassionate problem solver that you see yourself being in the future. And when you think about the activities and experiences that you've been involved in, don't think of them as, a segment of your work and activities section, right? Your paragraphs in your personal statement I guess it's better, should contain more than one experience. And a paragraph is usually one topic or maybe even two related topics, which host more than one experience. So keep that in mind as you're writing your personal statement, right? Whereas your work and activities is going to be one experience, right? In your personal statement, your paragraphs are going to hold, multiple experiences to explain how you've prepared for medical school and what you learned and what you gained. All right, so a little note on AI for those of you who are into Meta, ChatGPT, what other AI system you all love to use. Please avoid using it for writing your personal statement. And why is this? Because AI knows nothing about you. It knows nothing about your unique story that you've been on your journey to prepare for medical school. I promise you, if you go to ChatGPT right now and type in, who is in your first and last name and put a question mark, it is never going to give you a story about your journey to medical school, right? And so write it yourself, okay? But what can you use AI for? Well, you can use AI to help you brainstorm. You may even want to use it to help you with editing, but know its strengths and its limitations when it comes to editing within sentence structure and, some of the suggestions it will give you, right? And keep in mind that, schools check for AI use, and even the AAMC has a certification statement where they're asking whether the writing that you've put in this document is truly a reflection of you and your work, right? And so you want to be able to certify with integrity that it is your work. So please do not use AI to write your personal statements. All right, now let's think about that first paragraph. So do we need something catchy? No, not at all. You do not need a hook. You don't need anything catchy. Just briefly introduce how you became interested in becoming a physician. And, think about your personal story that led you to this initial motivation, right? And keep it brief. Like I said, about 4-ish sentences is good to get your point across. And avoid a lot of the drama or, being too funny, right? And then also avoid scenarios and quotes. Like I said earlier, this isn't a creative writing essay for your English professor in undergrad. So, it was a sunny and warm day when I saw you don't really need all of that space. Remember, it's only 5,300 characters. Be direct and to the point, right? And then also a lot of the drama, the gory scene at the beginning of your statement. The woman was covered in blood when she entered the emergency room. We don't need a whole gory scene that sounds like it's coming right out of a movie, right? Just, state the facts as they are and how they motivated you and move on to how you tested your motivation. And then also, We have a quote here from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And while he had a lot of great sayings and a lot of great quotes, the committee really wants to know you, not Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So please avoid using quotes in your personal statement. Okay. The middle paragraphs, the meat of your essay, right? The important sections that are really going to detail your journey and how you've learned and grown from that journey. So think about what your main ideas are. And then your format, you're going to start each paragraph with, a broad sense of what that main idea for that paragraph is. And then you're going to go into specifics, right? Specifically what you did, how you learned something, and then go back out to broad. And you may even see this as what, so what, then what, right? And that's just another way of looking at that broad, specific, broad definition. And when you're in your middle paragraphs in your writing, please avoid lecturing. And so the lecturing style looks a little bit like doctors should. Medicine is all about. The best way to treat a patient is. Remember, you're learning about the field of medicine, and you don't want to tell the physicians on the admissions committee how to do their job, right? And so instead, you can present it through the way that you personally learn. Like, I observed the doctor, ... when shadowing whoever you shadowed, right? And I realized that something was a good approach to patients in a certain way, right? And that way you're showing that little anecdote about what you saw that was so great and how you learned it, and something that you may want to take as, and also as something that you may want to take with you as you move forward in your training. And also in the middle paragraphs, make sure that you're direct from the beginning, right? Put emphasis through proportion, as we described earlier. Give objective examples. Avoid using metaphors and interpretations, because remember, not everybody perceives the information the same way. So as long as you keep it, be direct and be clear and not, put any metaphors and interpretations that physicians are going to have to figure out what you mean by them. Just keep it direct and clear from the beginning, right? Use the thesaurus appropriately, and make sure you're tying all your sentences together. And here we actually have a link to some connecting words to help you with those transitions throughout the paragraph as well as from paragraph to paragraph. So please, once you get the slides, take a minute and look at some of the transitions, or maybe you'll wait till you have a draft of your personal statement ready and then think about your transitions, whatever works best for you and your style of writing. Okay, so the final paragraph should be a strong statement that summarizes your experiences and emphasizes the skills and the strengths that are making you this, phenomenal candidate, right? You should include here how you've contributed, how you feel that you will contribute to the field, and your vision, right? And while some of you may want to, tie in your beginning and your conclusions, you don't have to, right? This is your story. You get to dictate how you tie things in together, whether you want a conclusion and a beginning and a conclusion that tie in together, right? It's your story, so you get to choose. Just like you get to choose which experiences you want to talk about in the meat of your essay. Okay? And so those are the comments on the personal statement. Before we move to a little bit about the MD, PhD prompts, do we have any additional questions?
I answered this one, but I also would like to get your thoughts, Natasha. What are some additional strategies for using AI to brainstorm? I let them know to first think about their experiences, but are there other ways they can use AI to brainstorm?
So I agree with Brittany. Definitely think about what your experiences are. But with AI, you can pose questions, or ask AI to pose questions for you, right? So that you can think about your experiences more broadly, or think about your journey to medical school more broadly, right? And so there are multiple ways that you can get AI to function for you in brainstorming. But I would first start off with your sheet of experiences and thinking about drawing out all the information that you can get from your experiences by having AI pose some questions to you.
Thank you. Sarah just asked, I was wondering about the general thoughts towards including experiences from pre-undergrad. So I'm guessing high school or from when you were very, very young. In terms of your initial motivation, or should you stick to experiences from when you were an undergrad moving forward?
So, with your initial motivation, I probably wouldn't pick a story from when you were like 3 years old, but maybe, if you were a little bit older and, there was just this spark, maybe junior high, high school, something like that, that hit you, and then you wanted to explore that field once you got to undergrad, that's perfectly fine, right? I mean, again, this is your story. Whatever your motivation was is really what you should stick to. But, some of those really early in life where you really don't understand the career as well are probably not going to be the best examples.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All righty. So the MD PhD application or applicants, you guys have 2 additional essays that you're going to be writing about. And so here you have the Why MD PhD essay, where you're going to use that essay to state your reasonings for pursuing the combined MD PhD degree. In addition, you're going to have your significant research experience essay. And in that essay, you're going to, specify who your research supervisor is by name and affiliation. You're going to discuss the duration of the experience, the nature of the project you studied, and your contributions to that research effort, right? And so let's start with the Why MD PhD essay and take a little glance at how you can think about approaching this essay, right? And so think about how you initially became motivated to, pursuing an MD PhD, right? A lot of you probably learned about this field from seeing an MD PhD do their job, right? And so think about, that initial motivations, again, avoiding the cliches, but then you can also think about what you learned about an MD PhD and how you learned it, right? Describe that formative research experience, thinking about that advancing medicine, the mechanisms, etc., and how it relates to how you've learned about the MD PhD path. Then you're going to think about bridging patient care with research. Really, this is really like the nuts and bolts of, the essay, thinking about that bridging patient care with research, because essentially that's really what you're trying to get across, right? Explaining how your clinical observations inspired your research questions, or how your research informs your clinical observations and how you want to be involved in that and how you've learned about that process, and then show that your pursuit is not a choice between 2 paths, but a necessary integration of the 2 degrees, right? And then think about what your vision is. Clearly and specifically describe your future career and your vision as a physician scientist. And some things and some aspects you really want to include in this essay are the medical knowledge to design your research, right? The importance of seeing patients to identify clinically relevant questions, implementing your discoveries in the clinic, and the feedback that you can get from your patients that are going to help you with those future directions of your research pursuit, right? Okay, that's the MD PhD essay. So let's think about the significant research essay. Again, here you have the committee that wants to know that you have had hands-on research experience, right? And they want to understand that they want to see that you understand the scientific process and can critically think through your research and about the next steps in the process, and that you have the motivation and persistence needed to be involved and maintain a research career. And so don't think of this essay as, just a list of the labs and projects you've been in on, right? And so, or that you participated in. Think about showing depth and reflection. So showing your journey through research, right? And so when we take a closer look at what this could potentially look like, you're going to start off with an introductory paragraph where you're going to briefly describe when and how you became involved in research, right? Mentioning, your main focus areas or maybe the type of research, and then show your motivation, right? What excites you about discovery? Why research, right? And then the body of your paragraphs or the body of your essay is really going to focus on that those significant research discussions or experiences, right? Maybe 2, 3, experiences you may consider discussing. And then really you're going to give them the context, the what question was the lab investigating? Explain your role. What did you actually do? Design, analyze, etc. What did you do as part of the project, right? Describe the challenges and the learning that you were involved in. How did you troubleshoot? How did you critically think? How did you grow from that research experience? Think about the outcomes of that research experience, the results, the implications of your findings. Did you get a presentation? Did you publish it? Did you develop your own new hypothesis based on your findings from that experience? But don't overemphasize this, right? And then you're going to go into your reflections, right? What did the experience teach you about science and about yourself? And then in your final paragraph, you're going to think about, integration in those future goals. So connecting your experiences to your future plan in medicine and or biomedical research, and explaining how the experiences shaped your interest, your desire to become a physician scientist, right? And so this is the MD PhD essay. And so through the personal statement and any of the other essays you may be writing for your MCAS or AACOMAS application, you want to think about how you're going to present your writing, right? And so here we're going to give, some advice when it comes to writing, and that's, use active choice verbs, right? And so here we have an example of a lot of passive voice. I was able to shadow, and my lab research was conducted. Through these experiences, I was taught, right? And so this is very passive voice. We really want to get to the verb as quick as we can in the sentence, right? And so we're going to use active voice. I shadowed Dr. X at, I conducted research. These experiences taught me, right? Dr. X treated the patient by. Get to the verb as quick as possible. So always remember when you're writing these formal persuasive arguments to write them in active voice. It will reduce the number of characters that you have, and it will be direct and to the point. Okay. So a common question that we generally get when we're reviewing applications or during our question and answer sessions is, can I mention in my personal statement my most significant experience or experiences described in my work and activities section? And so, yes, you can. And remember, a bit of replication is expected in this essay, but when you talk about the volunteering at, the NIH, right? You're going to explain, different anecdotes or different examples in the personal statement to the significant or most significant experience section of your work and activities. And so while the experience is going to technically be the same, the example that you use are going to be different. And so you do not want to copy word for word what's in one section to the other. Make the experiences different, and think about the differences in what you've learned from those experiences, what your takeaways and reflections are from the individual experiences or examples that you're going to be discussing in both the personal statement and significant experiences essays or prompts, or work and activity section. Okay. And then this last question in green is something that I'm posing to you all. And this is, a little ways down the line. But once you feel that, you have a good draft of your personal statement, I want you to sit down and reflect on your personal statement and think about, would my personal statement work for a different application? And what do I mean by this? What I mean is if you're applying for an MD through AACOMAS or through MCAS, can I use my personal statement essay to also apply to be a dentist or to be a PA, right? And really, you want that answer to be no. You want your essay to be specific to that unique role of a physician that you learned, okay? All righty. So now we're going to take a minute and we're going to hear from admissions. Dr. Sandra Casadas at the University of Maryland, and what she says admissions is looking for in your personal statement. So So hopefully this year it works because last year it didn't.
Hello, this is Sandra Quezada, Assistant Dean for Admissions at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. And here are my answers for some of the questions about the personal statement. The first question was about sharing maybe 2 or 3 essential elements that we look for in a personal statement. And I would say probably maybe the 2 main things we're looking for. The first is certainly getting a sense through the personal statement of what your motivation is for medicine, giving us the story of how you came to the point where you are now, how you've developed and grown to become inspired to pursue medicine, and also how you envision that this career is going to be the right fit for you and how you are the right fit for the field. And then maybe the other element certainly is that it's well put together, that it's well composed and written. Those would be probably the 2 main things that we're paying attention to as we read a personal statement. As far as elements or sections that would have a negative impact, I would say certainly if it's very disjointed or disorganized in how information is written, that can count against an applicant. And again, since we're looking for your motivation in medicine and sort of the why medicine question, if we don't feel like we've got that answer, so sometimes we see people go very in depth about a hobby or some other interest that they have, which maybe they see in their mind as a parallel to medicine, they never really get back to explaining specifically why is medicine your career choice. And so if we don't really feel that we came away with a good understanding of why you want to pursue medicine, this is going to negatively impact your personal statement. The common mistakes that we see, probably maybe one of the most common things that we see are that people have a tendency to oftentimes describe a personal medical problem, or maybe a medical problem of a family member or a friend, and essentially spend the whole personal statement, use the whole space there to describe that person's medical problem, or again, your own medical issue. And the reason why that really isn't the way you want to use your entire personal statement is, if you think about it, almost everybody in the world knows somebody, either themselves or knows somebody else who is battling some health issue, but not everybody needs to be a doctor. So I think it's reasonable, if that is truly your inspiration for, or what sort of lit the initial the light bulb, so to speak, to kind of make you consider medicine and move in that direction, I think it's reasonable to mention that, but then certainly move beyond that and show how, outside of just this one person's illness or this one period of sickness that you yourself may have encountered, how you've gone beyond that, how you've obtained additional experiences to move toward understanding that medicine would be something you would want to devote your life to, and also to patient care. As far as using a first, like a hook or dramatic opening in the first paragraph, honestly, I don't recommend it. We're not necessarily looking for the personal statement for entertainment. We really just want it to be sort of a written portrait of you. We just want to get a chance to get to know who you are, as best can be done through writing. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the time people think that a good hook or a good way to catch the reader is by writing a very dramatic or a very sort of gory kind of description of something that they've seen. And quite honestly, a lot of the time it really can be very off-putting. It can sound like you're trying to either over exaggerate and over dramatize something, and or it could make it just seem like you're a little too focused on some of these sort of more physical, gory aspects. It's almost sometimes sounds like people are describing a horror scene, and that's not medicine. What matters more are the personal connections. Think about how those things that you're seeing, how do you think that impacts those patients and their family members? So think more on that level and less on sights and smells, et cetera. How important is the personal statement? Could a good or bad personal statement determine admission or rejection? I would say, at least at our institution at University of Maryland, the personal statement is important, but in the sense that it won't necessarily make the application, but it could break the application. To get to the second part of the question, a good personal statement is probably not necessarily going to guarantee admission. And in fact, it will definitely not. We do holistic review of the applications and spend much more time, I think, probably looking through the description of experiences and activities. And we're focusing a lot on the clinical experiences and the volunteer experiences that our applicants have endured. As far as, whether or not a bad personal statement could determine a rejection, that's true. So even if you have the best grades and you've, really got a very well-developed array of activities and you write thoughtfully about all those descriptions, but then your personal statement either doesn't make sense or it's too overly dramatic, or you come off as being very self-important or arrogant. The tone of it sometimes is important too. Those could potentially break the application that would otherwise have been very strong. And just in terms of additional advice, I would say, just as much as you put in thought and time in writing a personal statement, I would do that as well for any writing that you're putting into the application. So for when you describe your activities, when you're answering questions on the secondary application, and make sure that you get a second set of eyes to look at your personal statement, whether that's your pre-medical advisor, a mentor, professor, someone whose opinion you value and respect and know that, that they have your best interests at heart. Make sure that you've had at least one or two other people give you feedback and if they give you some suggestions on how to change it, I would strongly consider that you make those changes, that they mean well, and especially your pre-medical advisors know what to look for. So I think sometimes some of these common mistakes that we see could have been avoided if somebody would have just simply had someone else give it a review and give some feedback on their personal statement. So that would be it for the questions, and I hope this was helpful. Thanks.
Alrighty, so those are our notes from University of Maryland.
Can I just say something really quick, Dr. Hill?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I want to just touch on, I really love that quote from Dr. Quesada. She's really nice. She's really helpful for any of you who are thinking of applying to UMD. But one thing that she mentioned, in a very common mistake we see in personal statements, is that for a lot of you in this presentation, you're going to have a lot of experiences, right? Way more than what you can talk about in 5,300 characters. Something that I see very commonly is that people almost treat their personal statement like a list or like a CV, where they're just listing a bunch of really cool and interesting things they've done, but providing zero context into why it matters. So like Dr. Quesada said, like, you can't just mention a hobby that you've been doing for the last 5 years and provide no context on what that means to your journey to becoming a physician. Or you're talking about, like Dr. Hill mentioned earlier, talking about your research, but no context on how it has impacted your decision to become a physician, or some leadership you've done, or some community service. So try to avoid using the personal statement as a way to basically cram in every single really cool thing you may have done, but instead talk about, the most impactful experience that you've had in terms of how has it influenced your decision to become a physician. That is far, far more important than trying to list the 20 really interesting things you've done since you started college up until now. That's a very common thing we see. I know you only get 5,300 characters, but you really got to use them wisely. So use the most impactful, influential experiences that you've had so far. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure that is very clear to everyone in this presentation.
And that brings us back to, I think I've said it 50 times at least during this presentation, is to reflect on your experiences, what you've learned, how you've grown from those experiences, how they prepared you for medical school, how they've prepared you to continue on your journey towards medical school. It's not just about what you did, right? Okay. So to help you kind of put together your personal statements, we have some good resources for you here. The Element of Style, which should still be on sale at the FES bookstore in Building 10, the first floor right next to the coffee shop, not the Starbucks, but the other coffee shop, and should be on sale there. Gives you a sense of, writing styles and how to improve your writing. So even if you want some help with just writing in general, I highly recommend this book for you to go through to improve writing. Okay, some other resources when you think about writing and proofreading and grammar, right? So we've all heard of some of these other kind of well-known Grammarly, Quillbot, Hemingway editor. So make sure you know what these resources are good at and what their limitations are when you're utilizing them for proofreading and grammar checking in your documents. Okay, another big resource that we offer for NIH postbacks or NIH trainees in general that are applying to medical school is our 10-module self-paced online personal statement prep course. And so this is a list of the 10 modules that we offer. So we start with an introduction, an overview of the personal statement. Yes, the modules, some of them do have homework assignments, but these homework assignments are here to help you best put together your personal statement and prepare to answer the different, questions about, the experiences that you want to include, about your journey, about your motivation. So please take the homework seriously and, really try and get it done, right? And then in the second module, we'll go through some of the essential sections of the personal statement in more detail. We'll talk about collecting experiences and, thinking about those other meaningful experiences. And we do have some, submissions of assignments there as well. And then selecting and creating, your personal statement backbone, going through the different paragraphs that you'll be writing about in your personal statement, creating that first draft and editing it. And then we'll have a nice, overview of in more depth than what I did today for the MD research and DO essays, as well as, a feedback module where you're going to go out and get 2 people. So like Dr. Quesada said, have somebody else put their eyes on it. Through this course, we're going to try and emphasize you getting people's eyes on your document. And then you can come to us for a final review. Okay, and so through these 10 modules, we also offer 5 live discussion sessions. And so these will occur on Thursday, 5 Thursdays in a row, starting March 5th at 3 p.m. And if you register for this course, you will get the Teams link in the Adobe Learning Manager system. So basically what the live discussions will be on, we'll have an overview of, some of the high-level material, go through some specific examples in some cases of, different sections of the essay, as well as answering questions. And so each session we will have question and answer portions. We'll have many reviews, and we'll actually, in some cases, even have examples for you to go through. And so we'll talk about, like I said, the overview, selecting experiences, designing and editing and general tips, We'll talk about the MD, PhD, the significant research and DO essays, as well as we're going to have our 5th session be dedicated to only questions. So we're going to spend an hour with you answering all of your last questions for our last live discussions. So through this online prep course, you will have slides and videos in certain modules, right? We will be answering questions during the live discussions. We strongly, very strongly encourage you to attend the live discussion sessions. And then remember that this is a self-paced course. So remember that the deadlines are suggested, but try to work on the content as soon as possible. Okay. So how do you register for this course, right? Well, Dr. Hardy, the director of the educational program, will be sending out an email to the different OITE listservs. And this email will have the registration information for the workshop. So that includes the link for the website page as well as the password. And registration will open on February 11th. Once you've registered for the course, you will receive, and give it a few days, but you will receive an email from our OITE Learning Manager system. In the email, you will see the acronym LMS. Please do not delete that email. Keep that email for your records. And in that email, it's going to ask you to accept the invitation so that you can gain access to the LMS. And that's how you're going to gain access to the course. The course is going to open on February 19th. You can read the general information and go through the modules and complete the coursework at your own pace. Remember that all assignments and modules are at your own place. So we really hope and really encourage you to join our online self-paced personal statement prep course and get some additional help with preparing your personal statement. Okay, so in addition to our personal statement course, we always have our question and answer sessions. And so our next one will be February 13th at 2 p.m. You can find the subsequent question and answer sessions on our events page on the OIT website linked here. You can also find our upcoming events. And our next upcoming event will be in March with our Reapplying to Medical School workshop. And so some other resources that you may find helpful as you start working through your personal statement, work and activities, prepping your application, or, some of the information from the AAMC website, like the medical school applicants information, Pre-Med Navigator, as well as the AAMC, formerly known as Twitter account, where they have a lot of great information that they share. For those of you who may be joining us from outside of NIH or will be leaving NIH, before you get the opportunity to have your personal statement read by one of our pre-med advisors, you may want to visit NAHOP to locate an advisor that can help you, or reach out to your home institution for your undergrad for some help. And so all of this stuff is available to you, and it's linked here. Okay, so do you need to think about self-care during the medical school application process? Of course you do. This is a very stressful time, right? There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of moving parts. Some of you may be taking your MCAT exam, writing your personal statement, your work and activities. Some of you will even be writing a MD, PhD essay or a significant research essay. So please make sure you're taking care of yourself. All the things that you do to maintain your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual health, you need to make sure you're taking care of them as you move forward. And if you need help in this area, we have, a lot of well-being events coming up, and we have a dedicated and great well-being staff that are here to help you. And with that, I would like to thank you all for attending our workshop today, and I will take any last questions.
Hey, Natasha, I think we are good for the questions. Someone did ask about what's going to happen with the course in the event of the shutdown. So unfortunately, you won't be able to access it if we are shut down, basically through February 18th, because you won't have access to your email. In terms of other resources that you can use in the meantime, of course, we're going to send out the slides for this presentation. We also have some resources available on our website on the educational advising page. So you can also look there. I'll pop that in the chat. Also, the AAMC has a number of different education of resources for people that are considering going to medical school, not only about the personal statement, but about selecting schools, about paying for your medical school education. There's a lot of resources on the AAMC website as well. But of course, you know, it's our hope that we'll be able to go live on February 18th, but obviously that's not in our control.
And remember, if we are out, there's also NAHAP, because I mean, you won't have access to us during the time. So visit the NAHAP website, see what information you can get there. If you have general questions, please reach out. They do have a question forum for students.
Thank you. So Sarah just asked a question. If you are applying for MD, so for MD only, should you try to avoid writing a personal statement that could also work for MD, PhD? Are there ways to work around that? So Sarah, I'm assuming you're talking about like talking about research in a personal statement if you're applying MD. Can you please clarify for me and Dr. Hill?
So I guess one thing to remember is the prompt is the same for MD and MD PhD for the personal statement. The prompt is why you want to be a physician.
So again, like we've made clear in the presentation, you don't have to talk about research in your personal statement. Only do so if it fits within the theme of your experiences. And again, like Dr. Hill mentioned, talk about how in the context of research advancing medicine, how it's going to influence maybe how you work with patients in the future. You don't have to talk about research. Many of our fellows do, but you don't necessarily have to.
Remember, you get to select the content that you're going to talk about in this essay, right? So you think about the clinical experiences you want to include, and maybe you decide that you want to talk about community service and volunteer and leadership, right? You can do that. It doesn't have to include your research. That is completely up to you. Think about the story and the narrative and the theme of what you want to write is going to be. And tell your story, your journey. Like Brittany said a few minutes ago when she was reiterating Dr. Quesada's points, right? Think about, what your theme is, what your narrative is, what your story is, and tell your story, your journey, the most important or most exciting, the most impactful parts or experiences that you've been in and been involved in. And that's your story, really, because that's really what's led you on this path and kept you on this path towards medical school. So again, research is something you can talk about, but you don't have to.
All right, awesome. So we have a few minutes left. If you do have questions, go ahead and type them into the chat. If not, we will hopefully see you during the next Q&A session that we have coming up, or at the personal statement course live sessions, which again are going to begin on March 5th. So, but any other questions, we're here to 4:30. If not, have a great weekend. All right. You're welcome, everyone. Again, any questions? We're here to 4:30. Put them in. Do you think we could let people unmute themselves, or let's see if that's something?
Yeah, you can. If you go to the control.
Controls. Yeah. If anyone, I'm gonna let people unmute themselves. If you have a question you want to say out loud, you're welcome to. Anybody still here? If not, we will see you later. You're welcome. Have a good weekend. Haley, Aditi, any questions y'all have, or you can put them in the chat. And then we also made it available for people to unmute themselves and ask out loud if you want to. Okay, again, Haley and Aditi, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Any questions from you all? They may have stepped away.
It's okay. We can end the event.
Yeah, we can go ahead and. All right, thanks, Natasha. Nice job.
Thanks. I
Oh.
have a question